Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hi and welcome to the Muslim G's. This is a weekly podcast by Lady G and
Dr. G.
Today we will be discussing the Turkish Constitutional Court's decision to turn the Hagia Sophia into a mosque after nearly 100 years of being a museum.
Right. That's so. I think this is something that's caused an uproar in Europe, but it's also, I think, sparked a renewed interest in the Islamic world. It gave people almost a sort of hope, right? What do you think?
Yeah, completely. I think for me, what I was surprised by the most, let's say, is the reaction of some of the people in the Muslim community as opposed to Christians around the world, or, you know, Europeans more generally. I was kind of expecting them not to like it. There is a general anti-Erdogan sentiment in the West, but I was really surprised by some of the English-speaking, specifically Muslim reaction, I'd say. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I'm sure you did as well, learning about Muhammad al-Fatih, learning about the Ottoman Empire, and generally it was a very positive education, but it's almost like, were they raised in the same way as us, or why are they like this? Like it's a very puzzling mentality when you're turning a museum into a mosque, and people are reacting in such a negative way, and they're supposed to be Muslims.
Yeah, actually, just in reply to that, I was kind of raised in the same way as you. But what would you say to people who say that we kind of, as Muslims, we grew up viewing Muslim history in a kind of with rose-tinted glasses, so to speak, that we kind of haven't looked at Islamic history from kind of a critical perspective? What would you say to that? And this was some of the criticism directed at Muslims who supported Erdogan in this instance.
I mean, look, if you're applying this to, say, Abbasid history or the Khulafa al-Rashidin, I can almost sympathize with that point, but I would actually argue the Ottoman Empire has been subjected to a lot of criticism, especially in more recently with the so-called Arab revisionist history, where they're trying to portray the idea the Ottoman Empire was an illegitimate caliphate. There's actually a strong sentiment, even from the Arab world, especially from certain Gulf countries like the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and so on. It's a very new sentiment. The idea that the caliphate should have remained under the Quraysh, as a Hashimi Qurashi kind of thing. There should be an Arab leader, whereas the Turks are illegitimate. They shouldn't have, Muhammad al-Fatih shouldn't have been a legitimate Khalifa. So it's not so rosy. People know that the Ottomans, they had aspects that were good and bad. I think you could apply that to other aspects of Islamic history, but I wouldn't say the Ottoman history, to be honest. Okay,
so why do you think there is a disparity between the the Muslims' opinions on this issue specifically? It seems to me like they're either with it or against it. I haven't seen someone who's kind of indifferent about it. And I'd say just amongst the opposition, you have two factions, so to speak. One of them is saying it should remain a museum, and the other is saying no, it actually should be turned back to. That was the most outrageous one that I came across, to be honest, that it should be turned back in. Yeah.
I mean, that's preposterous. Look, the thing is, it's what I call a difference between reactive and proactive Muslims. There are a certain breed of Muslims, and we cannot admit that it's a tiny minority. Let's be honest. There are certain Muslims who say that we have to make sure, embellish the our good name of Islam. It has to appeal. It has to be very, to put it bluntly, it has to appear peaceful, coexistence, these kind of sentiments, which, on the surface they are laudable sentiments. I'm not against these sentiments, but the idea that these sentiments should override key aspects of our identity. Do you see? You don't see, for example, the West framing their identity in such a reactionary way. Whereas we do it in a reactionary way. The fact of the matter is, yes, it was a cathedral. I mean, it was a cathedral. Of course, prior to the Islamic conquest, Hagia Sophia there was a kind of like a tug of war, a fight between the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians over this church, this cathedral, and then obviously Muhammad al-Fatih came. He conquered Constantinople at the age of 21. In 1453 he converted it to it is said that he bought it with his own wealth. Actually, it was sold to him by the clergy, and he bought it and converted it into a church. And then it was converted since 1453 until 1934. It was used as a mosque, the main mosque in Istanbul. Actually, it was used as as one of the defining features of the Islamicization of Turkey. And then it was converted by Mustafa Ataturk in 1934. So the idea now is it's a mosque. Then it was a cathedral, it's a mosque, and now it was turned into a museum. And the question is not to put it back as a church. The question is, should we revert it back to its utility as a mosque, as opposed to a museum? And I think people get bogged down, and they're talking about battles that happened prior to 1453 or at 1453. The issue is not that; it's 1934. Should that decision have been right to turn it into a museum or not? That's the key thing that the reactionary Muslims are missing.
Okay, I've read some comments about how the purchase deal, so to speak, back in the day was actually either happened under duress, or that it couldn't have possibly happened. In I think in one of the references that I read, it said it took it kind of the whole transaction, so to speak, took place over 3 days, and that is not a possible time frame for the purchase of a hugely significant international monument, even back in the day.
But just for the listeners, I think it's important you should clarify that the purchase deal was one of the basis, or the key basis, for overturning this decision, because the courts in Turkey, the constitutional court, deemed Ataturk's decision in 1934 to convert it from a mosque to a museum as unconstitutional, because they found this will by Muhammad al-Fatih, and the will was that he purchased the church, he purchased it from his own money, and then he endowed it as a Muslim waqf, meaning a trust that it can be used for the greater Muslim. So the idea is it was deemed unconstitutional. You can't take someone's personal property and just forcibly convert it into a museum or its waqf. So yes, look, the thing here is, it doesn't matter even if Muhammad al-Fatih went in and forcibly took the cathedral and converted it to a mosque. Let's just say, forget this will, forget this is fake. The Erdogan faked this, the Turks faked this. Let's just assume that Muhammad al-Fatih forced his way into that cathedral. We have to understand something, that this cathedral is not a normal church. There are plenty of churches in Turkey, plenty of churches in Istanbul, plenty of churches in the Middle East that are untouched, that are very older than pretty much a lot of the European so-called churches. They're very ancient churches that have been left untouched. They have been restored. They have been looked after. The issue here is that this was used as a political platform by the Roman emperor to promote his political rhetoric, to promote hatred, to start political campaigns. They would do political speeches there. It was a platform of hate, not a religious platform. It was a political symbol, not a religious symbol. If it was just a normal church, yes, you can argue that, it's unfair. Do you see what I'm saying? It was because it was being used for a political aggressive aim, and also used to hate on other Christian denominations. It's not just the war against Muslims, which, by the way, was not started by the Turks. It was started, the fight. It came, from the time of the Sahaba. There was a war between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Muslims.
So, okay, what would you say? I'm kind of playing what they call devil's advocate now.
Sure. Yes.
So what would you say to someone who says, Okay, but Erdogan's move is also kind of politically motivated. That he's doing it to increase his political clout. Obviously, a lot of people in the West would say this is a quote hateful move. I personally disagree with it, of course. But what would you kind of because this is these are a lot of the comments that are coming from the kind of quote left-leaning critics.
Look. I had not wanted to mention Erdogan this early on, simply because I think the issue of Turkey's modern political trajectory probably requires its own another podcast session. But look, Erdogan is not look, even if he's political, let's just again, everything is political. A politician, by definition, anything he does is political. If he does not do something, it's political. If he does something, it's political. Now, okay, this is a political decision that Erdogan took, maybe even if it's for ratings, for naked political ambition. The question here is, was it the right decision or not? Was it a moral decision or not? Did you see the issue? And a bigger question is, was this so-called decision to convert the mosque into a museum by Ataturk, was this a symbol of coexistence and peace, as people are alluding to? Because you know, you got a lot of these comments, right? They're saying it's what are they saying? It's like
that it was that the decision to convert it into a museum is kind of a symbol of hope and coexistence and peace and all that jazz.
That's nonsense. Because who did this? Who did this decision? It was Ataturk, one of the greatest enemies of Islam and Muslims in the 20th century. He was the Bashar of his era, Bashar al-Assad of his era. It's again like a dictator, a vile dictator, building some sort of empty maneuver just to peaceful coexistence. But the reality is, for Ataturk, he didn't convert churches into museums. No. For him, it was this mosque to be converted into a museum. He could have set up a museum next door to the mosque. He could have. Istanbul has many streets, many homes. Why didn't he do another museum for peaceful coexistence? He also, in the context, there's a wider context, that he changed the adhan from Arabic to Turkish, that he persecuted many religious scholars. He was not a man of peaceful coexistence. He's a vile individual, and the best thing that Erdogan could have done and is doing is undoing that disgusting legacy of Ataturk. You know, the Turkish people have suffered so much because of his legacy. So that's, even if it's for naked political ambition, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, Ataturk is obviously a very divisive figure in Turkey. You'd get the quote liberal / secular Turks who absolutely love the man, and then you have the kind of I'd say the majority Muslim.
I think they're just normal Muslims who do love Allah and His Messenger, regardless of their religious adherence. You know, there are people who their religious adherence does vary, and this is something that is found in different populations to different extents. But the point is, what has happened in the 20th century, 19th, 20th, especially the 20th century, is a minority of colonized individuals, rabid secular individuals who are forcing their ideology on the majority of people, forcing a particular narrative on the majority of people. And, obviously over time you will breed a minority of the population that will start to exhibit that, even if just to get closer to them and so on. And this is just with any political maneuver. But the majority, it's against the will of the people. It's against the very instinct of the people. The Turkish people are by instinct, regardless of their day-to-day religious affiliation, in general, they do love Islam. They do love, they do love the wider Muslim causes and so on and so forth.
I mean, the majority of Turkish people identify as Muslim anyway. So whether or not they're practicing is a different matter. Even if they turn it back into a church, I don't see it will be again largely symbolic, because
how many people are going to pray? 200.
Exactly. Like even from a pure utility perspective, it's a lot more useful as a mosque. Because obviously it will be used a lot more. I heard a lot of comparisons about what's going on now with Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab's approach when he entered Jerusalem.
Look.
What would you say to that?
Look, but let's just explain again to some of the listeners that one of the key kind of contentions, and we're going to talk about one of the leading figureheads who's been spearheading this, Imran Hussein, his so-called Sheikh Imran Hussein. But for now, what is this comparison with Sayyidina Umar? You'll see it a lot on Twitter, on social media. It's the idea that Sayyidina Umar, when he went into Jerusalem, when he liberated Jerusalem, he stood to pray. He wanted to pray, and he was at the main religious, the Church of Resurrection in the Holy Land, and he wanted to pray, but he refused to perform the prayer within the actual confines of the church. And the patriarch asked him, "Why did you do that?" And Sayyidina Umar is said, or alleged to have said, "Had I yielded, had I done this, the Muslims of the future age would have infringed the treaty. In other words, they would have then taken these churches willy-nilly around the Middle East, around the Islamic world, as mosques." So, the smoking gun. Sayyidina Umar is foretelling that in the future, he did this because he's worried that in the future Muslims will take churches as mosques, and therefore Muhammad al-Fatih has violated the basic essence of Islam. And Sayyidina Umar is way better than Muhammad al-Fatih. That's it. It's game over. The reality is, there is no comparison. Sayyidina Umar went into the Holy Land. The patriarchs, the religious clergy, they opened their doors, they let him in, they handed him the keys. It was a complete peaceful transfer of power. So in this case, it would under these rules, even non-Muslims have these rules. Like even at that time, the rules of war at that time was, if you are let in peacefully, you have to not violate any building. You have to let the inhabitants be as they wish, not change their religious affiliation, and so on and so forth. Muhammad al-Fatih was the cumulative effort of centuries of war back and forth with the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims, starting from Sayyidina Muawiyah. Probably, I think there was even a campaign earlier during Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, but the main campaign was Sayyidina Muawiyah. And of course, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the Sahabi, died or was killed, martyred on the outskirts of Istanbul, and he's now buried in what is the Ayyub area of Istanbul, where his mosque is there. So the point is, you cannot compare. By the sheer rule of law, Muhammad al-Fatih has right to take this church anyway. But the point is, he did not take any other church. He did not convert any other church. They restored, they were looked after everything else. It was just, this was a political symbol that needed to be changed.
Okay, cool. A lot of people in the supporting camp are saying that mosques in Bulgaria, mosques in Greece, and obviously southern Spain have been turned into churches, and no one's bat an eyelid. Why the discrepancy now? Why the double standards now?
You're not now the devil's advocate. You're proposing.
Yeah.
Look, let me first say something from our Aqidah perspective, like from maybe not Aqidah, but from our kind of core ethos. We do not have to react to what they do. In this case, the argument supports us, but we don't have to act what they do. Whether they, even if they returned all the converted mosques into churches. So you're talking about all these mosques in Spain, in Greece, in Bulgaria that were converted forcibly into churches. Even if they didn't do that, this doesn't make this decision wrong. We don't base our decision on theirs. It's the same idea of saying, why is it that they allow us to do da'wah, but we don't do da'wah they can't do da'wah, they can't do missionary work in our countries under the Islamic system. Because we believe we have guidance. If they're not confident enough they have guidance or misguidance, that's up to them. We can't dictate for them their values. But our value says, no, we are upon the truth. We don't allow anything other than the truth to be propagated. So in the case of the mosques, I want to remind people the painful history here. So in Bulgaria, we're not talking about a single mosque that was used as a platform for for violence and political sentiment and so on. We're talking about willy-nilly across these areas that were taken over. So in Bulgaria, for example, you had an Ottoman rule lasted in Bulgaria 5 centuries, by the way. 5 centuries. You had the Black Mosque, which is a 16th century mosque. It was turned into the Seven Saints Church. This is in Sophia. And it was turned on 27 July 1903. Yeah. The Benya Bashi Mosque in Sophia, again in 1576. This is actually the only functioning mosque was the only functional mosque in Sophia. The Qudza Mahmud Pasha Mosque, 15th century. Again, so these are mosques that were this was converted into a museum. It was the oldest mosque in Bulgaria, and it was converted into a national archaeological museum in 1905. So they converted the mosque in 1905. Ataturk, the enemy of Islam, says, "Oh, let's convert the mosque into a museum." Do you see? In Greece, you have the Tazakarkakis Mosque. I hope I'm saying that right. In Athens, a mosque in Athens. It was built in 1759 and it was turned into a museum. A lot of the mosques in Greece, by the way, in the different Greek islands, they were turned into museums, into car parks, whatever, into different functions. The Fathiya Mosque, 17th century, is being used as a cultural exhibition area. The Votanicus Mosque, or Athens' new mosque. Now this was a project to build a new mosque, so they said, okay, all these mosques have been converted to cinemas. Imagine a mosque converted to cinema. Imagine if Muslims have converted a church into a cinema. There will be uproar. We will never hear the end of it. So in the case of there was a new Athens mosque being proposed. The Orthodox Christian clergy, not the extreme, the mainstream Orthodox Christian clergy, did an uproar. They practically rioted over our dead bodies. The project till this day is being repeatedly delayed because of the opposition from the Greek Orthodox Church. Yeah, again, they don't need to worry about being peaceful and compassionate, right? But we have to worry about our image.
I've read this comment that I'm about to put across to you, which is, okay, even if they're doing this, and that, why do we have to, quote, stoop to their level? Why do we have to, have this kind of eye for an eye approach? Why not be the bigger people, the, quote, better people? And we start with, or we become the symbol of putting our hands out for coexistence and peace
For two reasons, for several reasons actually. Let's start with, again, we don't want to be, this is just a subset of being reactive instead of just being proactive with your own ethos, with your own values. They are not doing this because they're being the lesser people or not. This is just their values. They don't, you mentioned the massacre, 8,000 people, one of the worst, gravest massacre since World War II. That massacre that killed 8,000 Bosniaks, and obviously there was many other massacres in the Balkans, it was committed by Orthodox Christians. You had Greek militiamen, you had militiamen from all over the Orthodox Christian world traveling to fight and kill innocent Bosniak Muslims. So again, they didn't need to justify it until this day. They don't need to go up and say, we condemn this and this and that, because it's just not done. Whereas we feel this thing where even when a good thing happens, like converting a museum to a mosque, we feel like we have to, oh my God, we're ashamed of any positive news related to Muslims. Let's be honest, there is a lot of people who are ashamed of being Muslims, even though they are Muslims, they practice the Prophet Islam, but they have this shame of being a Muslim. I don't know why. Do you have an idea why they could be like that?
Yeah, I think it's because of, we're being fed this stream of media news about how bad it is or how terrible it is to be. Obviously, it's implicit. It's never kind of told in your face. That you have to, for you to be accepted as a Muslim, you have to be, quote, a moderate Muslim. And I'm not even sure what a moderate Muslim, like what it means. Because if you kind of practice, let's say if you're Sunni and you practice Sunni Islam, then by and large, you will be following the same practices. I know that people will say, oh, not all Muslims think the same. Of course, not all Muslims think the same. But I mean, the text is the same. And the interpretations of the text, fall within 4 schools that are kind of widely known. There's not that much variation. I mean, this is my take. Maybe. I mean,
if you say moderate in practice, well, most Muslims around the world barely pray 5 times a day and do the basic functions. Let's be blunt here. Most Muslims, they pray, I'm sure, but like, as in, it's like there's a daily struggle to wake up for Fajr for some Muslims and so on. The point, let's be honest, that Muslims, a lot of Muslims, some Muslims obviously do exceptional amount of sunnah and so on, but most Muslims do around the Islam Muslim world are sub-moderate, if we say. They're not even doing the basic amount. So if we're meaning it literally, most Muslims are, you know, if people are not practicing well, you don't tell them moderate, you just tell them practice properly. The other thing is, if you're saying moderate in belief, as you said, the beliefs tend to be quite stable, as in there isn't really, within Sunni Islam, the belief is stable. Even if you take Shi'ism, the belief is stable. If you take, within the belief systems, they're relatively stable. There are differences, and we tend to magnify these differences, but ultimately these are, even the differences are from very old established debates and so on. We're not going to bring anything new by bringing them up. So the point is, if you mean, reaction to foreign policy, this is a different topic. But I suspect that's what they mean. Like, for example, they condemned certain Muslims when they went and went into Bosnia, even though the West was, giving lip service to the Bosnian cause. But you never hear Orthodox Christians who went and traveled from Greece and Russia and Serbia and so on to kill. I'm not talking about the regular army. I'm talking about volunteers, militiamen went. You never hear them saying these are moderate Orthodox Christians. I've never heard that term, moderate Orthodox Christians. And yet we know Orthodox Christians, they have very fanatical people who do believe in, even till this day, they do say sentiments that are very hurtful and so on, and very hurtful towards Muslims. So it's a double standard, and fine, the West can have that double standard, but why are we internalizing that double standard?
I think indirectly the message is that it's not okay to be Muslim, or at least you are not given the benefit of the doubt if you're a Muslim. So you have to. You're guilty until proven innocent. And I think these people who like go on Twitter or like social media, like different social media websites, complaining about Erdogan's decision, they are trying to prove their worth as quote Muslims, because again, as I said, they feel that they're guilty until proven innocent, guilty in the eyes of the West, guilty in the eyes of how they're perceived by.
But it seems to be even more than that. If you said I'm worried that I'm being guilty because of the immense negative news against Muslims, I'll almost, not really understandable, but almost understandable. But we're talking about people who don't want to share any good news. This is overwhelmingly good news that Turkey is moving away from its fascist past. It's going back, and the fact that you're just going to get a reward for supporting this mosque, you supporting this publicly, vocally, you're going to get hasanat, the right type of hasanat. You're going to get hasanat for supporting this. People are going to pray in this mosque. They're going to do ibadah. Who are you trying to please? I
think they're a bit like what Malcolm X called like the Uncle Toms in the Muslim community, whereby they want to be seen as they want to be seen as reformists,
but they see themselves as woke Muslims,
and they're kind of I think they perceive themselves as like better than the rest of the community because they think that they're kind of critical thinkers, that they don't have to follow the masses. In their opinion, they're following the Western masses, but they're kind of contrarians in their community.
But they all seem to have the same talking points. For example, I was debating with this guy. I'm not going to mention his name, but I was debating with this guy, and he was giving me the exact same talking points as 10 other people I've read in other threads, and they're not linked by friends or something, just throughout the internet. They're saying the same points, and all of them are repeating a lecture that Imran Hussein, so-called Sheikh Imran Hussein, had mentioned a couple of months back about Constantinople and Muhammad al-Fatih, and we'll go into that, I think, right? So
can you explain it to people who don't know it?
Who Imran Hussein is? I mean, it's really disturbing that in our first podcast we're going to have to talk about Imran Hussein. But look, this is a guy. He's an old man, so I have to. I'm not going to bash him personally, because this is not about a personal bashing here, but he is, let's just call him Sheikh Imran Hussein, even though he has no religious credentials. He is an old man. He has been rambling, talking about end of time prophecies, but outside the norm of Sunni, anything even esoteric in Islam, like way beyond. For example, he will say that Gog and Magog, one day he'll say Gog and Magog are the AIDS virus, or he'll say they're Israel, Bani Israel. No scholar, that's beyond the pale. And then he'll say Dajjal is a system, not a man, which goes against clear ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As in, he will say stuff that are completely made up, and it goes to as far as him lying about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of making up hadith and so on. So it's beyond the pale, I think. And the only thing I can say is maybe he's got dementia, he's getting older, but I think he's been doing this for a number of years now. So I don't think we can keep giving excuse. But a couple of months ago, he's been talking. He's getting. I call him a Russian asset, to be honest. He's been promoting this idea that, we need to ally with Iran, with Bashar al-Assad, who's committing massacres far greater than even the massacre you mentioned that happened 25 years ago in the Balkans, that we need to support, more importantly, Russia, that Russia is our ally. And he says that and I want to quote from him, and allow me to do this, and this may bore you a little bit, but just bear with me here. So give it brief, but it's I think it's very important, because a lot of the people who are basing it, who appear to have woke opinions, they're just parroting this guy or subsets of these or people like him. This is an interview that he gave. He said, and when Muslims conquered Constantinople in a conquest which was largely shameful, like he's doing a question, he's asking a rhetorical question, and embarrassing for Islam. The conquest of Constantinople was largely embarrassing for Islam. When they conquered Constantinople, then Rome was transferred to Moscow. Allah. It was transferred to Moscow. Yeah? I told you he's a bit crazy. And so today, Rome is Moscow, and the allies of Moscow, Russia, Bashar al-Assad, Kim Jong-un, whatever. So the Prophet ﷺ prophesies that we Muslims would make an alliance with Rome. Today, who is making an alliance? That alliance with Rome. Who is showing religious integrity? It is not Saudi Arabia, which is allied with the Anglo-American Zionist alliance. Rather, it is Iran. Okay, so he's revealing his true colors. I want Eastern Europe to listen to me. Look at this. Look at the. He is the shameful one, not the Muhammad al-Fatih. I want Eastern Europe to listen to me, and I want Russia to listen to me. Allah. Okay, let's see what he's going to say. That on the day when Muslims conquer Istanbul, what he means is in the future conquest. We'll talk about this. There are two conquests. The first one that happened and another one. That on the day when Muslims conquer Istanbul, the conquest was prophesied by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah's blessing be upon him. The first thing that we will do, I don't know if he'll live to he's a very old man, but the first thing that he will do if he was to live is to return the church, the cathedral, Hagia Sophia, return it to the Christian world. And he spoke very emphatically. He wants to return it back to the Christian world. This is where they're getting the idea from. They're not making it up, yeah? And he goes, and when we return it to the Christian world, we'll have to return it with an apology. So sorry, it was a mosque. Sorry, Tawheed was promoted there. Sorry, move the Quran away. Get rid of the manabir. Get rid of Muhammad, Allah, Ali, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All these symbols in Hagia Sophia. Let's put the crosses back. We'll have to return it with an apology. An apology for 600 years of Muslim worship. He's apologizing for 600 years that Muslims did sujood, ruku', salah in that church, when it should have been a church, not a masjid. And then when Mustafa Kemal took it over, he added insult to injury. He took the house of God and made it into a museum. So he's complaining about Mustafa Ataturk's decision, not because he converted it into a museum, but because he didn't go the extra step to convert it into a church. So the first thing we'll do, the first thing, instead of returning, electricity, water, supply, feed the homeless people, no. The first thing we'll do is return Hagia Sophia to the Christian world. And I pray that Allah, he's making a dua now, may cause these words of mine to reach to Bulgaria, who banned the mosques, who persecuted Muslims, Bulgaria, and reach to Greece, who have some of the worst anti-Muslim sentiment in the entire Europe, and reach to Greece, and reach to Romania, and reach to Hungary, and we all know what Hungary is in terms of the far right, and reach to Hungary, and reach to Poland, and reach to Russia, reach to all of them, that we apologize, sorry about this, we didn't mean it, the mosque was a sad mistake, and so on and so forth. This is Imran Hussein, who people are parroting, and who was one of the pioneers. There may be other people who mention it. One of the pioneers of this idea that Muhammad al-Fatih is an illegitimate leader. What he did was a shameful thing, and so on and so forth. Do you see where this idea of turning into a church kind of stems from? It's disgraceful. I mean, I think that's shameful. What he said.
But are you sure these people who suggested that they should turn it back into a church are aligned to the sky?
It doesn't matter, even if they're not aligned to the sky. It comes from the same sentiment that Muhammad al-Fatih did a mistake, that Muslims did a mistake. Again, it's about being apologetic. All these people, even if they don't quote, even if they don't know Imran Hussein, they're quoting the same thread, the same sentiment, which is that Muslims, Muhammad al-Fatih was a horrific leader. Everything flips. Instead of this conquest that Muslims were around the world until this day are very happy with, no, it's a disgusting thing that happened, and so on and so forth. So he's saying it, and they're also expressing that, and they've expressed it, I think, clearly. You've seen some of the comments, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So do you see it?
And if you don't support their argument, they will just kind of lash at you and tell you that you just name you names that you'd see in the Sun and the Daily Mail and things like that.
Oh yeah, so they'll start maligning you with Islamophobic comments. So they'll say, "Oh, are you an Islamist? Are you a Salafist? Are you a this? Are you a that? Meant in a negative connotation, as in you know, as if." The irony is these were Sufis, the Ottomans were, but anyway, never mind. But they don't mean that anyway. What they mean is, if you don't agree with us, then you must be some sort of extremist, even though this is a very popular topic across the Islamic world.
And also, supposedly, they're coming from a place of, open-mindedness, and allegedly a place of peace, and a place of, wanting to coexist and so on. So it's mind-boggling that
it is peace for Bulgaria, Greece, Spain, Romania, Hungary, where they consider Islam as a disease and something to be eradicated. Yeah, it's peace for them. It's coexistence. They're very happy with this sentiment. Yeah, let's turn it into a church. But if they mean peace for Muslims, no, we've already established that they view Muslims as some sort of a aberration, as you said, Malcolm X's wise words, that they're Uncle Tom's, yeah, and other phrases that we should.
I think my biggest and I don't want this podcast to come across as like we're saying we're above that. We're definitely not above that. No. But I think there is a real pandemic in the Muslim community, especially the English-speaking Muslim community. It's also kind of finding its way into the kind of Arabic-speaking and the other languages speaking Muslim communities. The Uncle Tom's phenomena, basically, where they have to. You have to prove yourself to the West. You have to show that you're better than that. You're better than things that are explicitly written in the text. You're not saying, for example, I'm going to take a different interpretation of something. It's usually like you're going against things that are not debatable in the religion. Exactly. So it's kind of
we're going to get cancelled in our first podcast by things like feminism, clear-cut issues in Islam, things like hudud, things like just things that are so basic about something you would think is clear-cut, that we were raised as kids. I feel like this was something that al-ma'lum bid-din mid-darura. It's like a necessity in the religion for everyone to know, and we all knew it. We all knew it as kids. But then they come up with these new revisionist ideas that completely. You think did they have an upbringing that was unique or something? I just don't know. I really don't know.
I think there is, and this is a topic for another episode. But I think there is a very big problem in terms of the Muslims in the West aligning themselves with left-wing politics and left-wing groups in general, because they feel that they have to. In order for them, it's kind of like an unspoken agreement. Like the liberal lefties will stand up for Muslims in terms of their right to have spaces of of course when it suits them. Everyone
on this subject, you raise a very good point, because a lot of the liberals, let's be honest, even Jeremy Corbyn, who I respect. Generally, I like Jeremy Corbyn, and especially for his stances towards the Palestinian, towards Muslims in general, and so on. But Jeremy Corbyn has very troubling opinions. I don't know if he's retracted them or not about the Balkan conflict. He's at best a denialist, or he took the side of the Serbians. So you have George Galloway, one of the most disgusting individuals. Yes, when it comes to Palestine, maybe you have a better favorable opinion of him, but
in terms of Palestine,
but I think we've established now in recent times that a lot of people talk about Palestine, but then they have atrocious beliefs other than or elsewhere. He's outright Assadist. He believes in killing. What's the point of being pro-Palestine when you want to kill Muslims, the same Palestinians and Syrians and so on? There's not much difference in lineage between a Syrian and a Palestinian. There's a small border between them. You want to kill them by the million, and you support a fascist dictator. So they only tolerate us, the left wing, if we agree with their narrow-minded agenda on a particular issue, and we have to subscribe to their ideals. And that's the second part. The latter point is the problematic issue. For example, it's fine to tactically, I think, agree with people if it suits your agenda, but to make it clear that, we're allying on this issue. There's an alliance, for example, on a particular matter. For example, on Palestine. We agree that, we want to raise issue about the Palestinian conflict or the Kashmiri conflict or whatever, but you have your own secular liberal idea, we have our own Muslim idea. Other issues we're not going to meet. And then even the right wing, if they want to ally with others on the other issues, the family structures and so on and so forth, and morals and values and so on, yes, we can ally with them on that issue, but they have their own values, we have our own values. But the point is, Muslims feel everything has to be on the table. Khalas, the Quran, it has to be left-wing interpretation. There's even talks of a feminist interpretation of the Quran, secular liberal interpretation of the Quran. Why? Just, if you want to ally on the narrow points and make it clear that you have your own values. And if they don't like that, then don't ally with them. That's
I think it's because they have the lower hand in the unspoken agreement. They know that if they don't have the left in their support, then they feel that the Muslim community in the West will be completely lost. Because, to be honest,
even their hand, the lower hand, I know their hand is weak. I'm not, saying, oh my God, their hand. But compared to, there are other religious minorities. Let's just say Sikhs, for example. There are other minorities with far fewer numbers who use they have a more coherent voting, for example, voting. If you're using voting, for example, they have a more coherent voting bloc. They use their, whatever hand they've decided to use in a stronger way. They use their political branding. I know that different minorities have different influences and powers and so on. But the point is, Muslims they're not small in Europe. There's a large number of them in the West, in America, in Canada. So if they were a bit more dignified in the way they use their card, their ace, their hand, they will be, I think, taken more seriously. I know that there is a stigma against them, but they're not even using that. It's just, there's no coherent strategy. It seems to be just from...
I think it's because Muslims are viewed as I'm just going to be extremely real here. Like, Muslims are viewed as the enemies of the West, effectively, where Sikhs are not. So these Muslims feel like they have a point to prove,
Sure, I'm saying there's a severe stigma and disadvantage.
Yeah, which is why a lot of Sikhs and a lot of Hindus and so on, they can easily align with even the conservatives, and they don't have a problem with that because they are not perceived. They are perceived as the good immigrants. They are perceived as Muslims are perceived as the fifth column. Whereas they're perceived as, the grateful, the grateful immigrant, the immigrant who has overall contributed and quote integrated, well,
that's another phenomenon that we need to discuss. I think the attitude of some Muslims that they feel that they're so grateful. I don't mean being grateful is bad, but it's this idea of this inferior. You're always inferior. You're always putting your head down. But look, I think that these points are very important, but they should be left for another podcast because they deal with Muslim integration and attitude in the West, and I think people are listening to this and wanting to hear about Hagia Sophia. If you allow me just to go back to Sheikh Imran Hussein, and not just him, I mean the argument, I think instead of just attacking their rhetoric, I think it's better that we also academically answer some of their points. I think, let's be fair. Let's not treat it as this is just they're evil people. Imran Hussein is saying something shameless or painful. Let's actually take some of what he says, almost treat it seriously, and see if we can respond. So Imran Hussein latched onto the idea that لتفتحن القسطنطينية فلنعم الأمير أميرها ولنعم الجيش ذلك الجيش. Him and his contemporaries have said that this hadith of Rasulullah attributed to Rasulullah, you will liberate or you will enter Constantinople. فلنعم الأمير أميرها. How wonderful or how great is the Amir, its Amir. وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. And how great is the army, this army. So the Prophet is praising the leader and the army. And so the first person to liberate Constantinople was Muhammad al-Fatih. So Muslims said this hadith applies to Muhammad al-Fatih, and this is kind of like what we grew up with and knew. But they latched onto the idea that there was a difference of opinion on the authenticity of this hadith, and this is true. I'm not going to just because they have an opinion, it doesn't mean it's wrong. There were some. For example, Al-Hakim and Al-Dhahabi said that this is an authentic narration, but Al-Albani and Sheikh Al-Arnaout, these two scholars said that of hadith, they said that this is weak because of presence of a certain weak narrator in the chain. I don't think we need to elaborate on the detail.
Is that the hadith? Is that the hadith that praises the conquest of
yes,
So would you say it's authentic?
I think it needs careful examination. Because look, there's two aspects to it. Is it authentic? And there is a weak narrator. There is the problem is this narrator is unknown. And therefore the hadith is technically weak. Do you see what I mean? As in, it's. We have to also be honest that the narration has been weakened by scholars. So if you say it's a weak narration, it's a legitimate opinion. But there are the people then respond and say, even if it's true. So this is the opponents of Muhammad al-Fatih. They said, even if it's a true narration, how do we know that this hadith doesn't apply to the second conquest of Constantinople, not the first one? Because there's another hadith that Constantinople in the end of time will also be liberated again a second time. So how do we know that it's referring to this? Because you can't take end of time narrations and just say it's definitely referring to this particular individual. So they said, even if it's a hadith, that doesn't prove anything. It doesn't mean it's Muhammad al-Fatih. Do you see the issue? Mm-hmm. The other thing that having said that, even this doesn't mean that the conquest was wrong, because ultimately we can say that from the time of the Sahaba, the Sahaba were trying to liberate Constantinople. Muhammad al-Fatih is only following the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and more specifically the sunnah of the Sahaba who were trying to liberate the Constantinople. So if you're saying to me liberating Constantinople is a bad thing, I'll say to you, but wait a minute, you're saying to me now Abu Ayyub al-Ansari died in vain. Are you saying to me the great Sahaba who would try to liberate it and who had this vision of liberating it, and for them they had this vision that the first one to liberate it will be the blessed Emir? That was the common understanding in the Islamic world. So even if it doesn't apply to it, for sure Muhammad al-Fatih has a high status in the sight of Allah, just simply because he was the first to liberate it. Just the amount of hasanat he gets because the Turkish people then embrace. The area has Islam. There's so many reasons why he would be a praised thing, even if he's not meant by that specific hadith. The second aspect, I think, that he talked about Moscow, Ar-Rum, being transferred to Moscow. That the Russians are the Romans. There's narrations at the end of time of hadith that talk about Romans, that Muslims will make a deal with Romans and then the question is, who are the Romans? What is meant by the Romans? And the Prophet ﷺ, in referring to the end of times, he refers to three types of characteristics. He says Romans, he says Bani al-Asfar, and he says Banu Ishaq. He says Banu Ishaq. So for example, Constantinople, in the second time that it will be liberated by 70,000 members of Banu Ishaq who are believers. They will enter it peacefully, not with weapons. Prophet Muhammad make it clear they are not going to enter it with weapons.
So does that apply to Muhammad al-Fatih then?
No. This is the second conquest at the time of the Dajjal, just before the Dajjal comes. Oh. They will enter it, and then there's going to be a rumor that the Dajjal has come, and they're going to panic and so on. So they will enter it peacefully and Prophet Muhammad said that from different sides, from different aspects. They will gradually taking it by saying La ilaha illallah, alhamdulillah. They will do afkar and enter it. And Banu Ishaq means people of European descent. The best way to describe it in a modern sense is European descent. And this tells you that in the end of time, many Europeans will accept Islam, or people with European descent will accept Islam. Bani al-Asfar, is people who have, it means the blonde people, the people who have blonde hair. It's referring to the European characteristics. The Arabs did not consider Russians as Bani al-Asfar or as Romans.
Or even the Chinese, because I know Bani al-Asfar in Arabic is like yellow basically. And some people
it's not referring to the melanin color, it's referring to their brown hair. They call call it Bani al-Asfar, is referring to their hair.
As in blonde hair, as opposed to skin.
No. This is wide known during the time of Prophet Muhammad. Bani al-Asfar was people from that, what we broadly call Europe, Western Europe, and so, and obviously they're descendant, like America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, because these Europeans migrated, settled, and killed lots of people. So that's it. He says, the reason Imran Hussein thinks it's Russia is because he thinks, because the Eastern Roman Empire were Orthodox Christians, they then transferred and went to Russia. Because what happens is, after the Orthodox Christianity was defeated by Muhammad al-Fatih, the Russians said, we are now the inheritors of Orthodox Christianity. But Prophet Muhammad in the hadith, he doesn't refer to denominations of Christianity. And in any case, there were Catholics and there were, in the wider Roman Empire, the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, if you take it as a collective, there were Catholics, there were Orthodox Christians, and there were also Protestants. It was not a denomination. He's referring to their lineage, Bani al-Asfar, Bani Ishaq, referring back to the lineage to Ishaq ibn Ibrahim alayhi wassalam. So it's referring to their race as an ethnicity, that it's people from European descent. They will, the future conflict is going to be with them, and nothing to do with Russia. They're Slavs. The Muslims knew this. They would recognize them as Slavic, or a Slavic inheritance. So it's nothing to do with them being Romans, and this is something that is recognized from the Middle Ages, early times of Islam, and so on. Nothing to do with this. And there are also hadith that the Prophet Muhammad says we will liberate both Constantinople and Rome, Rome, yani. And here this tells you that the symbolic aspect here is that the Eastern and the Western, the former Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, will be liberated. So, and if you're going to say it's because of Orthodox Christianity, Russia and that area became communist, so does that mean they no longer became Orthodox Christian? But what if Brazil stopped becoming Catholic and they say we want to adopt Orthodox Christianity? Does that mean they become the Roman Empire? It's nonsense. It's talking about the lineage, and it's what we call Europe and European descended people. So I there's a lot of things we can address there, but I think we can leave it at that. And hope the podcast was useful.
Yeah, I mean, I've also read some tweets about, that the Hagia Sophia will now lose its universal value in terms of, being a symbol of different religions coming together and so on. And I just don't understand why it will lose its universal cultural significance unless...
Who said that? I mean, are you saying like Europeans said that or Muslims said that?
Just, I don't think it was. I think it was more like a to be honest, I can't remember now. I will be dishonest if I try to attribute it to...
Well, if it's European, again, I mean, does the Cordoba... I mean, they consider the so-called mosques that have been forced to convert to churches, cathedrals and museums as cultural sites, UNESCO sites. Greece, all these places that Greece abandoned, the European Union is pressuring them to restore it and so on, even as cultural
touches. From what you're saying, I can't remember now. I think the UNESCO raised some concern about it, but they said ultimately it's a Turkish affair, internal affair, if I remember correctly. What
do they mean? Because people doing sujood, they'll...
I think it's not. It will only lose, and even the kind of money coming in from tourism is only if Western tourists or tourists in general going into Turkey decide not to go there or not to visit the site, and that will be a double standard on their part. Why wouldn't you want to visit a mosque as opposed to a museum? That mosque was functioning it was functioning as a mosque for 400 years. I don't see why it will or it should lose its universal value. And it's not the first
religious place of worship that is UNESCO site. But in any case, you know what? I'm fed up with UNESCO, the UN, all these so-called global bodies. What they should do is go back and persecute all these Dutch peacekeepers in Bosnia who were raping and giving and handing over the 8,000 Bosnian men and women to be slaughtered by the Orthodox Christian fanatics. That's what they should be concerned about. They should be ashamed in the anniversary of such a horrific massacre that they're speaking in such a shameful way. That but my main concern is Muslims who have this inferiority complex, not the Western. They can say whatever they want. They can just fed up. I don't care what the UN says anymore. It's just fed up. But Muslims who have this attitude, they should be ashamed. Would they rather Turkey be the secular Turkey that was hating on Muslims, that hating on Islam, that was banning religious practice? That would they rather Turkey move away from its nightclubs and its alcohol and its seedy past and head towards a more religious way? They would literally rather that there isn't a mosque and they'd rather a museum. That just shows they're not here to please Allah. They're here to please I don't know who. I really don't know. Orthodox Christians or
I
West.
think it's surprise. Yeah, they're followers. They're kind of they're Western followers or whoever is following them.
But you never hear them talking about the many churches. The many mosques converted to churches.
Yeah, they're saying this is like stuff of the past, and
this is stuff of the
and anyway, like there's no. I think in their minds, I might be mistaken, obviously, but I think they don't see a reason as to why this should be reignited. What happened in the past kind of stays in the past, and we should all try to turn over a new leaf and come together and keep things as they are without trying to stir any religious conflict.
I don't want to give them ideas, but I'm worried that they'll next start saying the Kaaba and should be open to all visitors. I'm surprised they haven't said that.
I think this one will be. It will come up soon, but because of the pandemic, maybe even Muslims, Kaaba is not accessible to Muslims. But it's. I think ultimately, again, I don't believe in borders and countries and all that jazz. Anyway, but it's an internal Turkish matter, like it was back in Kemal Atatürk's time. I don't think a lot of Turkish people were that excited by his decision at the time, but he went ahead with it anyway. And as I said in the beginning, no one's bat an eyelid because they probably said, okay, it's an internal Turkish matter. So it remains an internal Turkish matter.
But I think it's beyond internal Turkish matter. It's something that clearly has given joy to millions of Muslims around the world. You get Muslims in Africa who are slaughtering sheep in celebration at this. You get Muslims in this Indian subcontinent who are very happy and ecstatic about this. It's clearly something that people, after so much war, destruction, and so on, people wanted, something. It's a feel-good thing. It's the idea that Turkey is restoring its role in the world.
It's feel-good, but these Muslim critics would say, it's a divisive feel-good thing, as opposed to and everyone is celebrating together.
Never please everyone. I mean, that's the thing. The Greek will never be happy, and let's be blunt, the Greece will never be happy, and the Bulgarians and the Hungarians until Turkey is completely Christianized, as in until not just Hagia Sophia, until everything is turned back into a church, or every mosque is demolished, the Sulmaniya mosque is demolished and so on, or turned into a church. Let's be honest, let's not pretend that what we want, they want to stop at the museum. They consider it a church and they want to make it into a church. So let's just, let's not pretend there's no rosy, painty picture that we're all, no, it isn't. We live in the real world here. There's realism.
In any event, I think the first salah or prayer will take place in Hagia Sophia on the 24th? I
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean in kind of in a week or two.
Yeah.
And I think from a purely utility perspective, it's much better off being a mosque that is actually being used and has a purpose, as
and
opposed
even for a politically ambition, it is much better to have a president who is steering the country towards a more religious character than to one who is enforcing secularism onto the people.
Well, some people would say Erdogan is like turning a blind eye to a lot of secular practices within his country, but obviously it's very tricky because he took over a country that has been extremely secularized. But I'm not well versed on Turkish internal politics at all. I'm just talking about Hagia Sophia right now. So from a pure kind of utility perspective, I think it's much better off being a mosque, because it will actually be used to serve the community that that lives around it, that visits it. I'm not saying just Muslims visit it. Apparently Turkey will keep it open for non-Muslim visitors, so in terms of as a tourist site, it will not lose its value. I mean, that's also debatable in a way, but I just think, if you have a huge building with a huge historical value, why not put it to use? Why just be a museum, Why not hit two birds with one stone, like kind of what they're doing now? So, a lot of cheers and a lot of... I would say the majority, like if you look at the overall Muslim reaction, it was positive, but there wasn't an alarming level of criticism and opposition that I did not expect, I have to say. I do know there is an increasing level of quote flaky Muslims, but I was a bit surprised. I was a bit taken aback by something.
These little things, I think they reveal a lot about the character of the people. You think this is just as you said, an internal matter, but I think it does reveal about where your kind of faith lies, if you know what I mean. Maybe faith is the wrong word to use, but where your kind of passion, iman, Islam, your focus lies, and who you're trying to please. And I think that's I think the people who criticize everything related to Muslims, they need to just take a chill pill. They need to sit down, they reflect, and see whether are they just trying to disagree for the sake of disagreement, or are they acting on the benefit of Muslims? Is this something that you got to go with the wider benefit of the Muslim world, and clearly this is in the interest of the Muslim world.
Is there anything that you've learned from this saga, either about the Hagia Sophia issue itself, or kind of as a reflection of the ongoing debate?
I think it's just taught me that there is hope. Yani, in the end, I know, despite all the negative stuff we've been saying, that overwhelming, the direction is heading in a more hopeful way. That sometimes these decisions come unexpected, but it gives us hope. We always hear negative news. This is something that literally almost came out of nowhere. This decision. And
can I just say something about this? What would you say that it may well be? I just don't want to blow Erdogan's trumpet too much. I'm not blowing Erdogan's trumpet. But I just want to say maybe there's an element of symbolism, and also I think there's an election coming up soon or something.
It doesn't matter.
So I just don't want to say this is like hugely hopeful and kind of came out of the blue.
I'm not judging it on one incident. I'm judging on a wider current, not just in Turkey, across the people. It's on the forefront. I mean, this is another topic. Why, like, if you compare, say, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, between now, the people are much more engaged in Muslim causes and Muslim ideals and so on. This is another topic. Let's leave it there, because I think that its elaboration will.
So you don't mind, even if it's even the symbolism, you don't mind?
Of course not, because the fact that he's going down an Islamic route for symbolism shows that the Turkish people themselves have changed in their character. That's what's giving me hope. Do you see? In the past, they were using nationalistic symbols. They were using perhaps symbols. Some countries obviously were influenced by Marxism, and so in Marxist symbols, some were capitalist symbols. Here now, he's using Muslim symbols, and that tells you that Turkey, as the nation itself, the values and so on, has returned back to a more rightful path.
Yeah, I think the kind of the vendetta against Turkey by Arab dictators and so on is for me raises a lot of
this is motivated largely.
It raises a lot of question marks about why the hate against Turkey. Why, even though it's doing economically better than the most of the Arab countries, pretty much all of them, I'd say. So I mean, kind of makes you question their motivations. It makes you question the West's motivations. Why the hate, basically? If the argument is, Erdogan's hateful, he's doing this to push our buttons, why the hate? I think my reply is also, why the hate? Why are you hating on Turkey all the time? I'm not talking about Hagia Sophia, but it seems like there's a constant stream of hate directed towards Turkey. Even like things about, I don't want to deviate too much from the topic, but just to wrap up, I think even things like, they arrest journalists and so on. I mean, you can talk about so many countries that arrest journalists. I'm not saying it's a good practice. I'm not condoning it one bit, but I'm saying there's a kind of the cherry picking, basically, who to go against.
And also people saying that Erdogan is a popularist and he's turning into a dictator. I'm sorry, but
Boris Johnson's a
Boris Johnson, you got Trump, you got, and obviously throughout Europe you got all these popularists throughout the Western Hemisphere. The fact is, he is elected by the people. Let's not sugarcoat it. He is elected by the people. He, whether you like it or not, and it's like they're so desperate to turn Turkey into this dystopian nightmare and so on, despite the overwhelming positive economical metrics coming out of the country, despite the development, despite the people are clearly happier. Clearly, there's a lot of good metrics.
I don't want to. Again, I think both of us are not well versed at all in terms of internal Turkish political matters, and we're not saying Turkey's great, doesn't have any problems. This is not the issue at all. But we're just surprised at the level of hate directed at a country that is doing marginally not just marginally, a lot substantially
better,
better than most of the Arab world and most of the Muslim world. Anyway,
of course it has problems. The point is,
and I know there's
Turkey of course has problems. I mean, obviously every country has problems, and I'm even happy to accept that Turkey has an exceptionally huge amount of problems, but the level of hate is clearly goes beyond any problems.
It's ideological hate.
It's an ideological hate, and
which is why
some Arabs and Muslims themselves have that hate as well.
Exactly.
I hope you've enjoyed our podcast, and if there's any suggestions about other topics we talk about, not all the topics are gonna be so contemporary or so heavy. We might talk about more other kind of more lighter-hearted topics.
Yeah, if you do have any suggestions, let us know, please. If you have any comments, whether pro or against what we've just said, or things that you'd like us to touch on or to tackle, or future topics, email us or leave us a comment. We'll more than appreciate it. And hopefully this will be a weekly podcast every every Sunday. So do let us know before the weekend, and then we can prepare something for you. And
and for the sake of the YouTube algorithms, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of that.
I'm not good at shameless self-promotion, but yeah.
Someone has to do it.
Someone has to do it. Okay, see you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and see you in the next episode. Goodbye.